robotic voice on. Okay, well, we're a couple minutes past 2:30. Why don't we get started? I think folks may straggle in for the next few. Folks in the back, voice at this level is right on. Not too high, not too low. Just monotone enough to put you all to sleep in the mid-afternoon. Okay, good. Well, I will do my best to keep your attention, and for those of you joining us on the web, all two of you, thank you. Hello. My name is Brett Stowes. I am an assistant clinical professor of law at the University of Nebraska College of Law. I am also the Klein Williams Director of the Entrepreneurship Legal Clinic, and I am excited to be here today to tell you a little bit about mind mapping and how we've integrated its use into the certain components of the Entrepreneurship Clinic, as well as a number of different ideas that we have for further expansion of it down the road. Thank you to Callie for having me. I was one of the few that were raising my hand in the beginning as a first-timer. Appreciate your welcoming me in here. It's certainly been a pleasure thus far, and I look forward to getting to know others of you throughout the day. So, and I guess the rest of the week. So, before I dive into the meat of the talk, let me give you a little bit of context about what I do. So I formed and direct the Entrepreneurship Legal Clinic, which is basically a small teaching law firm operating currently out of the basement of the Law College, where we basically serve startup companies throughout the state of Nebraska. So we're in Lincoln, Nebraska, which is in the eastern quadrant of the state, but we work with clients all the way out into the Panhandle and everywhere else throughout. We serve clients, and what I do is I supervise the legal work that 8 student attorneys do under my supervision. And those students change every semester. We typically teach during the summer as well. So I have the opportunity to work with 24 students during the course of a year. Each of these students largely works individually, and they work on about 3 to 5 different client matters at any given time. That may include multiple matters for the same client. That may include just one matter for multiple clients. It's very much a hodgepodge of different things depending on their interests and our client availability. Each of them spends about 250 to 300 total hours of time in the clinic during the semester. And they're aware of that coming into it, and I work very hard to make sure that those, what seems like a lot of hours, certainly does to them, to me does not feel like enough to really give them a holistic opportunity to really engage in the practice of law. So I'm very critical in particular with how they use their time, and that's in part what led to this tool. So prior to my joining the faculty in Nebraska, I was in private practice for about 6 years or so, doing corporate M&A work. Was at a firm in Washington, D.C. for most of that time, but I also worked for about a year at a firm in Lincoln. And at the end of the day, it's this experience that I really draw from every day to really work hard to convert that experience into effective teaching and law firm management on a day-to-day basis. So, enough about me. Mind mapping. So, we're talking today about mind mapping in the context of clinical legal education. So the substance of today's talk really largely stems from my experiences over the last 2+ years in managing the clinic law firm, which really, at the end of the day, includes use of mind mapping technology to organize and make client assignments to my student attorneys. And by the end of today, you'll have a good sense for what we use it for, and I hope that it comes up, creates some new ideas for you in your own walks of life. Now, bear in mind, like many new clinicians that are coming out of private practice, creating the clinic and running it is really my first experience in running a law firm, right? Coming out of private practice, one of the benefits of being in a firm is somebody else is managing the enterprise, right? So this has been very much a learning experience for me with a lot of trial and error, a lot of experimentation, which is equal parts fun and terrifying. In that regard, I've really done a lot of experimentation because of the variables that I find each semester sort of repeating themselves. In this case, it's largely the 8 new students every semester, new priorities, new goals, new capabilities and interests, and also an ever-shifting client base. And that's not even every semester, that shifts every week. So that's where this tool really comes into play. And the thesis of my talk really is that I have come away with thinking that mind mapping is a worthy tool for your toolkit. For me, I can say it's made my job as managing partner at a law firm easier, improved the outcomes for my student attorneys, and really given my staff and students an added lines of view of all the open matters that are outstanding at the firm at any given time. So let me give you a roadmap of where we're going. I'm going to give you a brief overview of what mind mapping is and its characteristic features that really define it. Then I'm going to do a brief hypothetical scenario that kind of illustrates the circumstance that mind mapping really serves to help, followed by a discussion of the outcomes that I think are worth achieving through client assignment, and then we'll go through the example just kind of piece by piece of how we use it in the clinic. I have printed examples I'll give to you all at the end of the day to take with, so feel free to avoid trying to draw everything feverishly on your paper or electronic device. And then we'll wrap up with some additional applications that I see as possibilities, as well as Q&A. So that's what we're going to do today. Any questions before I dive in? I'm hearing a little bit of feedback. Is anybody else hearing that?
Yeah.
A little bit? Okay, of course. My tech savior has left the building. Any better? Now you're not hearing me. Okay. All right, how's that? Are you hearing me at all?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So, what on earth is mind mapping? Well, so mind mapping is an analytical and organizational tool characterized by visual representations of ordered information, or hierarchical information, if you will. Commonly believed that this concept was invented by Tony Buzan in the 1970s. Mind maps typically take a central idea and surround it with connected branches of associated topics. So the primary appeal to mind mapping is that it creates a more free-flowing and non-linear structure, which really permits the organization and then linkage of ideas and concepts in ways that traditional pen and paper aren't necessarily as well suited for. So, for example, in preparing this presentation, rather than beginning to brainstorm my ideas in a linear list or outline or on paper, I actually began brainstorming general themes and ideas using a mind map, which I then played around with until a general structure began to appear, sort of resulting in something like this. And in fact, what I can say, since I had the opportunity to create the Entrepreneurship Clinic, a lot of the initial brainstorming and clinic design that I did was really highly influenced by mind mapping techniques. The thing that I like to tell people about is I had all these ideas, they appear in my brain at one time or another, and it eventually felt very overwhelming because they just kind of keep popping into my head. Mind mapping was the fantastic brainstorming tool that allowed me to literally dump everything out on paper to create a little bit of mental real estate for myself. It looked actually something like this. This is the mind map for today's presentation. If you like, I can email this to you and you can leave now, or if you can zoom in really, really closely. But basically, this is a great brainstorming tool. It's also a great tool to take those brainstormed ideas and try to find structure. So I love the fact that it really helps you kind of go from a non-linear form and create structure from the morass of different ideas. So what are some of the characteristics of mind mapping that really make it such a groundbreaking tool? So to illustrate this, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to flip over to a mind map. This is actually, again, that mind map for today's presentation, which I'm just going to kind of play with a little bit for a moment. This particular piece of software is called Concept Draw, and this is one that we've actually just recently started using in the clinic. When I started using mind mapping software, actually, it was also when I first received an iPad, my first touch device, was quite exciting. And so the actual mind maps that we're going to show you for the clinic were first devised on this guy right here. Okay, and Concept Draw has been a more recent addition in that where I moved to a Windows-based laptop system. We're looking at possible applications for other students, and this is actually a Windows and/or Mac software piece. So let me dive into some of the pieces here, and what I'll do. So I showed you that monster map a few seconds ago. This is it kind of distilled into its sort of fundamental level of outline. One thing that's nice about mind mapping is it allows you to focus in, zoom and go big, or zoom out and go big, or focus in on specific sections. So right now everything is minimized. What I'll do is I'll kind of expand this particular piece of the tree. And if I can get it on the screen. So this is an example of what the map itself looks like. Okay, so under what is mind mapping, there's all these different interconnected ideas. So the one, I guess, feature, and it's kind of related to the fact that it was used on an iPad, this is a very pliable medium, right? So you can move this guy around, you can take ideas and quickly shift them from section to section. I've got these 4 different components, I want to move them around. The related component is that, that these are all interconnected ideas. And so as you make changes, the software shifts everything else to in response to your changes, right? So a piece of paper doesn't do that. And here you can literally move ideas around and everything else sort of shifts around in concert. There are a lot of visual cues here. I tried to give a few examples. These cues are not particularly germane to the presentation. They're just more indicative of kind of what you can do. But through icons, through colors, through shapes, through different connection mechanisms, like over here you've got a call out thing here, you've got arrows you can draw relations to between items. You have all sorts of different visual tools to help communicate very specific information without all sorts of verbosity and items that can kind of muddle the map. So I'll go through some of those visual cues when we get to the example in a little bit. But both of the software suites that I've used have a lot of different visual cues to give you a lot of possible ways to quickly denote information that you can kind of look to at a glance. This is a tactile feature, a function, right? So while this is on a desktop, you can use it on a touchscreen device. My computer is actually a touchscreen, so you can actually kind of get in here and move items with your hand or a stylus. I think that the tactility really kind of almost builds a connection between the user and the information, which to me is a real helpful sort of way to connect with the information and get foster being a bit more creative and encouraging tinkering. Frankly, is what I would say. Lastly, for reasons that will become clear in a moment, this is a very nice feature because it's electronic, right? So the information is all here on the screen. I can shut it down and it will go onto the hard drive, onto a thumb drive, onto the cloud. I can open up in other devices and kind of go right back to this point in time and reshuffle things as circumstances dictate. We'll talk about some alternatives to mind mapping, which I think fail primarily in this particular on this particular metric. Okay, so let's go back to this component here. So let's go through a little minor hypothetical. I'll try to be brief. The hypothetical it's not so hypothetical in that it really kind of bears some modest resemblance to my own experience in sort of an early semester, pre-semester period of time, thinking about new clients coming in, thinking about how to match those clients with my students. I have taken some creative license to the extent there are any Whovians in the audience. This might be modestly amusing. For those of you who aren't Whovians, you're welcome to start Googling all the information you start to see on this next slide.
What's a Whovian?
Oh, what's a Whovian?
Should I know?
So that's for the folks who are not as geeky as I. So Doctor Who show has gone on for.
Oh, now I got you.
Yes, gone for a while.
My coworkers came later.
Very good. So we'll go with that, and I'll try to avoid getting caught up in my own hypo because that was one critique I received from colleagues when I did this practice run the first time. So your first semester of your new clinic is coming up, right? You have this opportunity to build a clinic. You get excited, you get nervous. So good things happen, right? So your first group of 8 students signs up for your clinic. Okay, good. So you're not going to be without a job, right? So you have some students to teach. And all the hard work you're putting into build outreach in the community is resulting in a lot of interest among potential clients, right? So let's say you've got a slew of potential clients, let's say 16, who are interested in working with your not quite licensed attorneys. Again, in fact, it's almost worse to have 8 students and then no clients, right? So those roadblocks are passed, and then you've got some basic information about your client's legal needs as self-reported by them in an intake form. So you have some sense for kind of what they're looking to do, and so based on that information, you go ahead and put together your first set of client assignments. Now, even then, this is Microsoft Word, right? So fairly linear, but still some graphical, or I guess some modest structure modification. You take some efforts to avoid assigning the same type of matter more than once to a single student, at least not a significant amount. So entity formation is a big common one that we see in entrepreneurship clinics. One of my goals for our students, for all of them to do an entity formation. So you'll see a lot of that. But you try not to, you want to give every student a different sort of sense of experience opportunities. And so you're excited. So you go into boot camp, day number 1, first semester of operation. You're orienting the students to the basics of transactional practice. And then the other day you inform them of their client assignments. The Whovians in your class are a little confused. But they look at this and then you tell them, go forth, students, contact your new clients immediately, forthwith. They leave, they're freaking out, they're stressed, they're nervous, and then the next day they start making calls. So meetings start happening, right? So stuff is happening. You made a choice that you want your students involved in the intake process. They're starting to learn that maybe the ones that are good at communication, they think those communication skills still need some modification work when you're dealing with clients. So all is good. But however, as these initial meetings start happening, you get additional information and some complexity starts to creep into your world, okay? So you start having to make some modifications to your initial assumptions. So let's talk about Rose. Each of her client meetings went well. However, she learned that both of those items, the contract piece, the liability piece, were speculative, not going to be legal needs that they need anytime soon. And the entity formation pieces are actually, they're both single member or single owner companies, right? Basic single member LLCs, not all that complicated. It's like, well, I kind of need some more work. You certainly agree. Well, we'll have to work on that. So another colleague, Donna, on the flip side, both of her entity formations actually turn out to be quite complicated. We're talking 3 or 4 member founding teams who may or may not have some experience in working with lawyers. They have all sorts of needs that they need to have figured out. Shareholder matters are very complicated. I tend to like to team people up. So, like, well, okay, I should probably team up Donna with some colleagues. What happens next? Sarah Jane Smith. Well, so her client, Adipose Weight Loss Solutions, they have additional work. Goes beyond what their intake form said, right? In an intake meeting, one of the goals is to explore with their clients what they actually needed and give them an assessment. So they have a couple of contracts that they needed. Let's see, manufacturing agreements, some informed consent, waiver issues, good educational opportunities, right? So you're like, okay, good. Let's add that to the list. Well, now, of course, I'm concerned that Sarah Jane has too much work, right? She only has 250, 300 hours, of which maybe 200 would be pure client work, so maybe this is going to be a little bit too much for her. In addition to client needs being different, sometimes we learn more about our client's commitment level from these intake meetings, right? So let's go over to Clara. Poor Clara, she made all these attempts to contact her clients. They had told us they were ready to go and they'd be ready to meet quickly, and neither of them have responded to her phone calls or emails. I don't think the clinic I don't think we would have authorized her to send texts, but maybe she looked them up on Facebook, and then nothing, right? So we're 3 weeks in and she's had no forward movement whatsoever to even start the representation and start doing the legal work. So, okay. And these marks really do kind of mirror what I would write on a piece of paper, right, if I was doing this. So I'm a bit frustrated here. She needs some more work because these assumptions were all wrong. And then let's go to poor Rory here. So Rory, the Cybermen are one of kind of a classic Doctor Who villain, right? So the Cybermen representative came in and we're talking to Rory about their needs, and they said, and they weren't that pleased with Rory's initial reactions, and he started telling Rory he needed to be upgraded, and Rory found that kind of insulting. In fact, it might have been said kind of ominously, so he might have been kind of scared for his safety. So in any event, the Cyberman representative left, and he was muttering something under his breath, delete. So in any event, it became clear we weren't going to work with this group, right? So we took them off the list. And so now we just got one client, right? So we need some more work. We got to give him some more work. Another component that sometimes changes is we learn more about our students, right? So I don't do interviews for all my students. I do have an application process, so I know a little bit, but I don't know them well. I live in the basement with my current clinic students, so I don't know everybody in the law school class. So I learned a little bit more about Rory through our first couple weeks. He hasn't taken trademark law, but this initial assignment made a little bit of sense, because as far as I could tell, Headless Monks IPA, they wanted to put in a trademark application for their beer brand, right? Basic application. I'm comfortable with a student who hasn't had trademark to do that. But, darn it, we learned more in this meeting, right? So the client says they need a trademark. Well, they've actually already applied for a trademark. They were denied. They wrote back into the PTO and said, hey, our application should be granted. The PTO said, no, denied. So now we're talking about a trademark appeal, which for those of you who've done that, a little bit more complicated. Now we're talking about pseudo case law from pseudo judges making pseudo decisions about whether a mark is confusing or not. And Rory hasn't taken trademark, so now I'm a bit concerned that he's not going to be up to the task without a lot of handholding by me or an outside attorney to help him figure out a thing or two about trademarks. So now all of a sudden this assignment doesn't seem like the right one, right? I've got other students who have taken trademark. He hasn't. Similar situation with Amelia Pond. The family of Blood Oranges, some regulatory counseling needs. It turns out they need very complicated FDA advice relating to their particular product. She hasn't taken administrative law. Again, another key procedural component that's going to really underlie a lot of the work that she's hopefully going to do. So you're like, well, all right, this isn't the best assignment. Again, we're in week 3 here. Week 3 of 15 or 14, but we're already a fifth of the way through. It's not ideal to be making a whole bunch of revisions, right? And then lastly, one other thing we learned is River Song here. Again, I'm sorry that this is a long hypo because I have a lot of fun with it. But so River Song, we learned during the process that she is going to return to her hometown to practice law after graduation. Her hometown is Oud. Oud is down the street from Ord, Nebraska. It's a small town, but it's full of bustling business activity. And so you think to yourself, well, gosh, it'd be great to give her a client from Oud, right? Start to build a Rolodex, demonstrate her legal abilities to folks in that community, build a brand for herself. Well, darn it, we actually have a client from Oud Brain Food. I assigned them to Martha. So now I'm like, well, maybe I should switch these two now that I've made a connection that you're from Oud. And again, do you do that in week 3 or not? So I use all this just to demonstrate it doesn't take very long for a lot of assumptions to get kind of complicated or found to be incorrect. And within this medium, Microsoft Word, let's assume I put these in tabs, or just tab them across the way. And now how am I going to go in and make changes? I'm certainly not going to feel really eager to mess with a Microsoft Word document. I don't want to write it down on a piece of paper and try again. So I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed now. 3 weeks into my semester, my students are a bit annoyed. And I'm having to make a lot of decisions kind of all at once. So that is sort of my attempt, at least, to demonstrate the complexity that exists at least in my clinical setting, because of the belief that there's actually a lot of outcomes that we can maximize by making intentional choices on client assignment. So considering this hypothetical, let me see how I'm doing on time. Okay. So considering this hypothetical, what are some desired outcomes? I'm going to flip back to flip back here to my map. So I think there's a lot of outcomes that can be achieved by virtue of client assignment. So again, I'm thinking of what is the right process? The answer is going to be mind mapping. What's the right process to help foster achievement of these various outcomes? Now I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, just to avoid boring everybody. But at the end of the day, you've got a whole bunch of different outcomes. Is this going to work? Oh, no. Ooh, I pushed the button and it screwed up my map. There's a whole bunch of outcomes that I think are worthy of achieving. So you've got 3 primary constituencies that I think are particularly relevant. Computer, the Cybermen have taken over. So students are obviously kind of our primary client. So within the realm of students, we've got educational goals, professional goals. We want to give them a good opportunity to develop their legal expertise. Might be giving them opportunities to try a variety of legal issues in the course of their semester. Might be giving them a chance to deep dive into a complicated issue with on an area that they have some expertise in. We see this a fair amount with IP. They usually have one student, only one, who has a whole bunch of interest in taking a bunch of coursework in IP, and so I like to give them an opportunity to really test that with a complicated IP issue. Developing their legal skills, I think an example of that is communications, right? Not all communications are the same. Communication is a critical tool, but there's a whole bunch of very important subtools. Communicating in writing, whether it be emails, informal or formal client memos, contracts, administrative proceedings, and then the good old, oral communications, whether it be in-person interviewing, communications over the phone or with video conference, communicating with opposing parties. You have all these different means of communication, or different types of communications that you want to give your students a chance to sample, right? And a chance to see whether their skills have prepared them and give them an opportunity to try it out and learn. In addition to educational, there's professional goals. I mentioned the possibility of making connections for these students who are going to go into practice. Maybe it's with an industry area, maybe it's building the potential for future clients. I tell my students I love the best compliment I can get is when we as a clinic are fired because the client's going to hire the student when they graduate, right? So, so those are a few of the kind of key student goals. Obviously, client goals matter a lot. As a clinician who is licensed, my students are not, all the legal work we do out of the clinic has to be good, if not awesome. And I certainly want to maintain my own license for my own livelihood. So we want a process that will help us generate quality work product. We want to definitely be great if we can manage our obligations to our clients. And then from an administrative perspective, we want to optimize the workload, right? So some students, well, for every student, you want to give them more work than they think they can handle, but not so much work that they're so overwhelmed that they can't do anything, right? I certainly made choices over the last couple of years that have kind of skirted the line when trying to find it. You never know for sure and how much a student can handle. You also want to be equitable among your students. You want to give them as much as you can, but you want to try to spread the workload equally among students as possible, or at least equitably. And then being ready to adjust as circumstances change, right? If this is going to be an administratively helpful tool, it needs to be flexible. Stuff happens, right? Clients fall off the planet. Startups are inherently unstable. Most of them will fail within a few years, maybe even one. And in many cases, especially I see this with college student startups, the students themselves are in such a such a complicated and volatile time of life that things change just like that, right? So we want a process that will do that will service us in those situations. So with all of those outcomes in mind, the reason why you're really here, let's talk about options for satisfying those goals, right? Paper. Paper is a great option. It's been around forever and ever. You can write this all down, you can scribble on it. It's not very flexible though. It's also inherently linear. Whenever you have a piece of paper, what do you default to? You start writing in outline format, right? It's not easily modifiable, it's certainly not flexible, and it really is not, as a medium, promoting creativity in any meaningful way, right? So, second option, how about the whiteboard, right? It's kind of a glorified piece of paper, right? But you have 4 or 5 colors probably on the, on the board that you can play with. It's upright, so maybe you're feeling a little bit more like an artist on a canvas, being very creative. But this doesn't really do the trick either, for a number of reasons. One, it's also very inflexible. I want to switch things around. I got to erase this part, and I'm going to move it over here. All right, I got to erase this part, move it over there, and redraw this. Now, I'm not an artist, and my handwriting, as you can see from the other example, is terrible. So this suffers from those sorts of problems. Similarly, unless you have a dedicated whiteboard that you can just leave this information on all semester, you're going to have to redraw the thing anyway when you want to revisit various things as circumstances change. Yeah, so not ideal there. So how about the concept of note cards, right? Let's objectify each of the items, kind of like a mind map. But let's objectify them so all of our matters or all of our students have a different note card, right? You can kind of hover over them, look down, think globally, look for patterns, zoom in, zoom out, move around, right? So there's some appeal to this concept. Downsides from me would be each card is probably likely fairly linear in nature, and you could get creative and put colors or stickers or find some ways to put visual cues in there. It does require a lot of space. I mean, you could use a floor, you could use a wall, you could use a large table. Again, if you want to be able to revisit things on the fly, is that floor or table or wall going to be? Can you leave that dedicated to your mind to your mapping during the course of the semester, or are you going to put it back in the deck and then whenever you make changes, you got to spread it out again and start over, right? So it's not space saving in the slightest. So all those having flaws, mind mapping I believe is an answer. It solves a lot of them. And so now let's dive into the map that we have currently using in the clinic. I mentioned before that I migrated to Concept Draw. That's a new program for me, just in the last month or so. The one that I've been using on the iPad for the last 3 years is called iThoughts. I've been very pleased with iThoughts. I think it's a really nice tool. It's only for the Apple user, unfortunately. So whether it be your iPad or they do have a Mac version as well. But because this is kind of the most robust of the systems we currently have in place, this is where I'll walk you through. And I'm going to go into a bit of painstaking detail, just kind of all the different cues. What you're seeing here, there's a bunch of information, and all of it is there with some intention in mind. In fact, our early mind maps were much simpler. They were basically kind of 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of clients underneath each student. Then we started trying to figure out, okay, how do we communicate different pieces of information, and then eventually I started forgetting what pieces of information meant what. So we actually put together a legend. Right, so the good way to free up space in your brain is to just put it down on paper so you can selectively forget it until you look back. So we've got a nice little legend here, and I'm going to walk through each of these different components. Let's go ahead and start with color. So for me, color really is the most visually obvious choice when making sort of key visual indicators. And for me, when I'm looking at client assignments, what are the most important things that I want to make sure my students have, and that's a variety of legal issues, okay? We're an entrepreneurship clinic. We see all sorts of different transactional matters under the sun. Over the course of the last couple of years, it's become clear that these first three are the primary categories that we, A, have demand for, and B, that really satisfy, in their own way, individual sort of pedagogical goals that I'd like my students to have. Now, each semester, I certainly don't have the chance to necessarily give each student an equal share of each of these. It really does depend on the clients. It depends on their needs, which are always changing. And then, of course, we've got the purple other for everything else. So let's go over to Dan, student Dan. So here we've, again, on a quick visual glance, we can tell we've given him a variety of different legal matters. I don't have to read what's in the boxes to know that I've been able to give him each of the three primary sets of legal issues that we work with here in the clinic. So that's color. Let's move over to the next one. This is so for shape. So shape, I think, is a little less obvious, right? In fact, you might have looked at the map before and not necessarily noticed that there were variations among the different boxes. Some are oval, some are square. We use this to denote a significant but less important difference between our clients. We work with some who are sort of in the high growth potential sort of market, i.e. if they will succeed, they need a rapid introduction to the market, rapid financing with the hope of a possible acquisition or truly hit the Facebook model and go public, right? In Nebraska, that's not the lion's share of our clients. I'd say maybe 20% of our clients could feasibly fit within that model. The rest of them are small businesses, and I think this mirrors the type of clients that these students would have if they practice in Nebraska. So that said, it's good to have variety for the students. Nick here is an example where he had a couple of different small businesses, one of the high growth varieties. I think it's a good opportunity to give students some exposure to folks in each of those spheres, right? There's some great, where difference exists, it creates opportunities to educate and to illustrate those differences to the students. But again, less important and less obvious from looking at the map in terms of sort of visual inspection. The third one would be the icons. Now, iThoughts specifically has a limitation in that each of the ovals or squares you create can only have 2 icons. Okay. Of course, me at the time, I was like, oh, well, this must be some universal thing with mind mapping. Of course it's not. But what it forced me to do was be much more strategic and intentional about how we were going to use icons, right? So actually, if I recall, the first semester we started doing this, I was getting nervous about this bottom set with the flags. But let's talk about the first one, the hats. So location of our clients, okay? This is a very important factor for me when I'm assigning matters to my students. Insofar as I talked about difference earlier. I think there's a lot of fantastic exposure opportunities to give students a chance to see urban client versus rural client, okay? In Nebraska, there are 2 cities that are over 100,000 people, Lincoln and Omaha, and the rest of them are 50,000 or below, I believe. Maybe one's a little bit over 50, I can't remember. Similarly, working with clients that are outside of Lincoln does create some headaches for our students, right? Folks in Lincoln can come to the clinic to have a meeting, but the students can go to their offices very easily. Folks in Omaha, it's an hour away, probably less likelihood of a frequent in-person meeting, more reliance on phones. The folks with the white hat in Greater Nebraska could be anywhere from 30 minutes away to 6 hours away. Now those folks will be lucky to ever meet in person, okay? I love giving the students a chance to deal with that, right? Dealing with the fact that your communications will inherently be different with clients based on the distance from you. The folks in Greater Nebraska, I highly encourage my students to use video conferencing technology. That's always fun because a lot of the folks in rural Nebraska have very poor internet signal or internet bandwidth speed. And use of video conference technologies by no means is sort of fully adopted yet. Not everybody has FaceTimes on their computers, or at least a familiarity and frequent use of it, right? So again, giving students variety of different clients from different locations creates opportunity for difference, opportunity to teach them variations that they will experience in their own practice. So let's flip over to Alexander. Now here I actually made a choice to use the hat in another way. You can see on Alexander's bubble he's got a blue hat. In this case, Alexander was a student who was from Omaha, Nebraska, planned to return to Omaha, Nebraska upon graduation, had a particular interest in meeting and working with clients in Omaha, right? That's helpful. It's very helpful for me to know. This is a great opportunity to give him that exposure. So 2 of his 3 clients are, in this case, from Omaha, as you can tell from the blue hats. In this case, I gave him, for his 3rd client, I gave him a Greater Nebraska client here with the white hat with intention, right? Show the difference. Give him a chance to work with folks in rural Nebraska. Maybe he would find, I really like working with folks from Greater Nebraska as well. And maybe he would open his door in his own practice to working with folks outside of Omaha, right? A lot of Nebraska lawyers don't stay and work with clients in their community. They have to get in the car and they drive and they meet people all throughout the state. So that's a big sort of a thing I focus on a lot, is trying to give students variety of the locations that they're from, and then similarly, if they have particular interests in mind for where they're going to practice, I try to give them an opportunity to meet and work with clients from those communities, or if not, those communities from proxy communities. If they want to work with somebody in Western, if they want to go to Western Nebraska to practice after graduation, and they don't have any clients from Western Nebraska that semester, okay, fine. We'll get you somebody in the Northeast that will, again, hopefully from a cultural perspective, approximate the type of experience that student would have in a smaller community. Okay? I mentioned the other icon component, new client and carryover on the bottom. So this was one of the ones I was focused on very much from the get-go. We worked very hard to bring on clients with matters we can get done in a semester. There was one semester that we were 90% or so successful. There were 6 of them that we were not. So this does not always work, right? Life is not always quite so clear. And sometimes the students don't make as much progress as I think they should, and sometimes the clients are also not as responsive as I think they should, right? So for the incoming group of students, I think there's a very different experience if they're working with a brand new client or if they're working with a carryover client. I think each of these have independent value, right? The new client, both the new client and the student, they're both feeling very nervous about the whole thing because neither of them at that point are very familiar with the clinic, right? But the student has to fake it. There's also a process we have in place in terms of doing an initial meeting, doing an engagement letter, setting up the systems in our document management system, our time management system to deal with the new client. All that sort of administrative component is very, very important. And I want to make sure the students have the opportunity to have at least one or two brand new clients that are just sort of for them to bring on. The carryover client, some semesters we have 2, some semesters we have 10, just depends. The carryover client in some cases knows more about the clinic than the incoming student does. I actually think that carryover clients are also a very valuable asset to have in a clinic, because so many attorneys, whether you're in practice brand new or you've been in practice for years, you are still going to jump into matters that have been rolling for a long time, right? Becoming the new guy to the party, if you will, is a very common problem as an attorney, regardless of experience level. And so having the students, A, identify that fact, and B, deal with it, is a worthwhile opportunity. But that said, I also don't want to give, I don't want to give a student a bunch of carryover clients without a new one. Okay, so I try to balance that out. In the case of Alexander, you can see from the flags, 2 of his clients were brand new, and in that case, that was a trademark appeal that had been sort of ongoing from the prior semester, right? So he had some variety on that metric. Okay, let me zoom out a little bit. So there's another component we haven't talked about yet, which is the connectors, right? So there's a bunch of different ways that you can connect and make references to various items within a mind map. And in this case, what we've used the arrows for are to denote, talk about or to show some shared characteristics, in this case shared clients among the students. Early on I made a decision to have every student have their own workloads, so that they all work largely individually on their different clients. Many clinics take a team approach where they say work with a single partner for all their matters, right? So with the individual approach, you create some administrative hassle, right? We bring on more clients, it's more work for me to review, but there are some great and actually necessary times when I need to have the students team up on things. I mentioned shareholder agreements. My second semester of teaching, gave this poor student a complicated shareholder matter by himself, and it just totally overwhelmed him, right? It's not something that's covered in your typical business associations class. All the human dynamics involved in a shareholder agreement are complicated, and it was frankly overwhelming. So I almost always try to pair students, at least in groups of 2 or 3, when we deal with those sorts of issues. But here's an example where we had a few students that were sharing some clients or sharing matters. So the solid arrow in this case means that I've got a matter that is complicated enough that I want to assign multiple students to it. They each have independent they're each responsible for the matter, right? So I grade them each on their workload for that matter. We've also got circumstances where, in this case, business is open, where a client has multiple matters. Now, one option for those clients is to just hand it to a student, say, here, student, business is open is your client. They have at least these 3 different things you'll be handling, right? So that's option 1. A lot of times what I'll do is I will break up those matters among multiple students. And the reason I do that is just is more sort of client exposure that student can have. So if a student has 4, let's say 4 matters they're working on, if 3 of them are from the same client, they'll only work with 2 clients. If they're all from 4 different clients, that's 4 different client touch points, right? So this is a circumstance where I decided to break up these matters among 3 different students. So I mentioned administrative burden earlier. So you can imagine a scenario with a student, and let's say they're working with other students on team matters. If they're doing 3, 4 different matters with different partners, you've got some administrative burden that you've now created for the student, right? Scheduling meetings, finding time to meet, having meetings fall through, delays that occur, just the coordination factor, right? In this case, with Danielle on the bottom and Alexandra on the top, I decided to give them 2 shared clients. In one case, they're working on the matter together, and in one case, they're working on different matters, but for the same client. Now, those 2 students can come up with a weekly or bi-weekly meeting time, and then talk about both, right? So in the world of limited time resources, I might be less concerned if I had these guys full-time for an indefinite period, but given the fact that I only have them for such a small period of time, I'm very mindful to minimize the necessary time they're going to spend. It's purely administrative. Now, there's value in the administrative. I'm not going to say there's not, but I would like to make sure that it doesn't balloon the other the other more important things. Now, it doesn't always work, right? You play the cards you're dealt. Mind mapping helps you, in my view, come up with an optimized outcome. In this case, for Joe, he has 2 of his 3 clients where he's kind of sharing them. He's got to coordinate with Alexandra and Danielle on Business is Open. He's coordinating with Dan on Timing the Moments. In this case, they're shared clients, but they're not shared matters, so I kind of made the choice, well, kind of them's the breaks. That's the way that it had to work this semester. But again, having that information is very helpful. Okay, trying to balance a whole bunch of complicated variables here, and the connectors are a very helpful way for me to do that. So that is really kind of the nuts and bolts of how we use mind mapping in the clinic. All right. Now, I want to hover one moment before I move on to the next part on the flexibility of this medium, because I really strongly alluded to it earlier in that the other mediums are not flexible. But the flexibility component here really maximizes my ability to make good choices. Okay. So 2 weeks before our semester, my legal assistant and I were putting together these lists of initial clients. We know that most of them will probably become clients, but not all. And I'll make a map like this on I'll get it done at the end of the day. I'll put it aside for a day, I'll come back to it. I'll look at it over again from a different viewpoint. I'll make all sorts of changes because I'm looking at the world a little differently, right? This medium really fosters and encourages me to tinker, to play with it, to give different opportunities. And sometimes what you find is outcomes that are completely unexpected because you play with the different options and try different allocations. It's really a dynamic process of bringing on new clients all at the beginning, but then knowing you'll be bringing on more in weeks to come. It's a dynamic process in that you get to know your students from day one, a little more, a little more, a little more every day. And so for being such a dynamic process, a dynamic solution really is necessary. Now during the first, say, 4 weeks of a semester, this document gets revised dramatically. So I will hand this to my students at the end of the first day of boot camp, right? So we're talking like 4 hours probably of me mostly telling them how much I expected them, and sort of the things that coaches do to motivate their team. But mostly I freak them out, and then at the very end I then say, here you go, and I expect you're going to call all these people within the next 48 hours, right? So they're kind of freaking out about it. But the thing that I like about this as a communications tool, as an expectation setting tool, is it tells them you don't have to be fully linear in how you look at everything in the law, right? So a lot of the students are in their all my students are in their 3rd year. They spend the last 2+ years in courses that really focus on the linear, logical, rational, legal analysis, right? And exam taking that largely incentivizes thinking about things in very structured, very formal ways. And what I like to do in the clinic is to at least attempt in the semester I have to really kind of blow that up a little bit to help them understand that for me as a lawyer who practices my craft, I don't always look at things that way. In fact, there's a lot of value in trying to develop that nonlinear lens for these students. And so, during the course of the semester, this will get revised, I'll recirculate it, and really try to hopefully give them some buy-in to the fact that I've put a lot of time and thought into the clients that they're working with. Now, they may not work out, and there's always one student. It doesn't matter. There's just one student that gets 2 or 3 just dud clients. And I have yet to figure out how to avoid that. I think it's something in the universe. But in any event, the hope is that the students buy into the choices that you make by virtue of sharing with them the process and sharing with them the way in which you look at this. So let me focus in then. So if I'm such a fan of this as a tool for creativity, what are some other ways that we can use it, right? This is actually where I'm at. So about 3 years, going on 2.5 years in of doing this clinic, I'm at the point where I'm like, okay, how else can I use this mind mapping in the clinic? And I think these are just a slew of different options. I won't cover on any of them very long. other than to say we do reflection memos during the course of the semester, usually once every 3 weeks or so. I've tried to tell the students use some nonlinear form of thinking about some of the questions I ask, and they don't. For them, nonlinear is not in the IRAC format, which is frustrating. But so we were actually at a point now. So concept draw I mentioned, educational pricing is $25 a user, and so we're trying to come up with a possibility of actually giving them the tool to use for purposes of reflection, perhaps for purposes of managing their workload or creating action plans. I think if given the opportunity, say, hey, you've got all your client matters, put together an action plan and submit it to me. And don't use Microsoft Word, use this, right? Giving them some different way of looking at the world, because when they get into practice, at least in Nebraska, they're going to find a profession that is relatively resistant to change, relatively being completely resistant to change, particularly with technology, right? And so I think we have a really great opportunity as clinical faculty and as part of the legal education profession generally, to give them a view of what it means, of what law practice could be like if you apply different ways of looking at it. So those are some thoughts from my perspective. That's kind of where we've gone. It's about 5 till 3:30. I'll open up the floor for questions here in a moment, but what I'll do actually here, I'll probably just hand these up here, pass them around. So this is, again, just a visual example of what I give my students at the beginning of every semester with all the different mind maps. And then for those of you who might say, well, hey, I think this is an interesting tool, at least to tinker with on my own time. So my student assistant, Sammy, thank you. She's on the web, I hope. So she put together this fantastic little chart of options, different software suites that are out there, kind of what some of their capabilities are, what platforms they run on. There's some information about educational pricing, but it won't surprise you, many of them don't put that front and center on their web pages. So you might have to call in and find a little bit more about it. But for those of you looking to learn a little bit more, I think these are some good opportunities. So with that, I will be quiet. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Have you done one for figuring out how to cure that 3 to 4 week lag of changes?
So the question relates to that 3 to 4 week lag, sort of in front of the semester. And is your question whether we've done mind maps to try to overcome that, or?
Yeah, as a practical matter, how to get that semester going a little more quickly.
So really the thrust of the question I think really boils down to how do we minimize that fundamental design either flaw or strength in using the students to conduct intake interviews that always results in some sort of a delay, right? You tell a student to call on Monday, they call on Wednesday. The clients return the phone call on Friday or maybe the following Wednesday. And then they say, I'm free a week and a half from now, right? So all of a sudden we're in week 3, week 4 before the meeting happens. The meeting happens and it's like, well, their needs aren't ready. Oh, okay. Well, now we're in week 4 and we have to start over, right? So there are some sort of fundamental components of the timing that are hard to fully eliminate. But what I would say is we have worked really hard to minimize it, to minimize the risk of it happening. And that involves a lot of expectation setting with the prospective clients, making them realize, hey, you've been selected. There are 60 in the queue. We're picking 15. Congratulations. You better be ready to go. And if you're not, we're going to move on. These sorts of messages we try to send them beforehand. It also involves trying to help the students realize that if they don't get moving, they put themselves at risk of being suffering for those delays. But that is a fundamental issue that we have not yet figured out how to fully resolve, other than having us or prior semester students do some intake interviews so that we have more information on day one. I see your hand back there.
Yeah, thank you very much for this chart. It's
You're welcome.
helpful because I'm a little overwhelmed when I look on websites. But do you have one in particular that you think is really, really good, other than iThoughts?
So the question is, are there any that I think are really, really good? So iThoughts has been the one that was literally recommended to me by a fellow colleague who said she used it on her iPad when I got my iPad. And being a person with limited budget, you buy it and you go with it, right? So I have been very satisfied with that one. And actually the version that I've used has recently been upgraded. I haven't upgraded it yet because I just haven't put the funds for it. In terms of moving forward, though, for finding one that's been it's a good possibility for expansion, the Concept Draw has been the one that we've been the most intrigued by, in part because it's a per user sort of one-time fee. It's not an annual fee or not a monthly fee. That's something that many of the software models are moving to a more use-based fee instead of a one-time thing. 25 is a lot cheaper as an educational price than a lot of the other ones we looked at. Some of them were like $75 for educational or $300 for regular price, right? So there's a lot of different ones out there. So I think there are some others that are maybe a little bit more robust, but at the price point, at this point, we're pretty excited about Concept Draw. And they did not pay me to say that.
So how does that get paid for? Do students buy it like they buy a book? Do you just the clinic?
Question about payment. Perfect. This is exactly where I'm at. My legal assistant and I have been working through this question ourselves. At the moment, my hope is that what we can do is purchase 8 licenses, so 8 user licenses, and set up generic student 1, student 2, student 3 accounts. And then at the end of the semester, tell the students and sort of have them, require them to sign something that says they did this, that they delete it from their computer, so that we still have just a single user of that downloaded software. That's the current thinking, but we haven't got there yet. At the moment, it's just been me in terms of having the software, and we haven't. None of the students have had access to it.
So do any of the softwares have any kind of encryption or password protection? How are you providing for confidentiality?
So a good question about confidentiality. So at present, the information that we currently put in the maps, I'm comfortable with from an internal firm perspective. Because at the moment, I actually don't share it electronically, and all the information that was on here today was all sort of made up. So once we get into a circumstance where they're going to have electronic access to it and be able to share it among the folks in the firm, we're going to have to make sure that folks are comfortable with that they understand that they can't share this outside the firm. So Concept Draw, for example, it's actually it's an application you download on your Windows or your Mac machine, so it's not cloud-based at all. So I think some of those issues go away there. There are some really interesting packages out there. I don't remember off the top of my head which ones they are, where it is more cloud-based, and they're actually really centered on sharing, among teams, right? So you have a team of folks that can all access the same maps and comment and feedback and stuff like that. I think there where you have it resident, say on the provider's cloud site, then you start to get a little bit more concerned about it. At the moment, for what we use it for, I'm not too concerned about the information in that. What we're sharing is these are the folks we're representing, and this is the scope of legal work we're doing. We don't, at the moment, get into anything more specific than that. Other questions, comments? Well, I'll stick around for a little bit if anyone wants to chat about it, but thank you for being here today, and thank you, and enjoy the rest of the conference.